what's very clear is that when the Israelis mean peace, their idea of peace is domination.
Welcome to The World Unspun. I'm your host, Maxine Betteridge-Mose. My guest today is Mat Nashed, a freelance journalist based in Beirut. Matt is the former features reporter covering the MENA region for Al Jazeera. I've been following his reporting for a while, particularly around the war in Sudan. But today, our conversation was focused on the war in his own backyard.
The Israeli military has expanded its operations and advanced deeper inside southern Lebanon, with the stated aim of creating what it calls a buffer zone to protect Israel's northern communities.
Lebanon was excluded from the US-Iran ceasefire first announced on April 7th, and Israel took this opportunity to launch renewed attacks with fury.
The Israeli military launched what it said were 100 airstrikes at multiple locations across Lebanon within the span of 10 minutes.
Lebanese people endured 46 days of intense Israeli bombardment and a ground invasion in southern Lebanon, which killed 2,100 people and displaced over 1.1 million people. Then, on April 17th, a 10-day ceasefire was announced. But within hours, Israel violated this agreement, and its forces were reported to be carrying out demolitions, artillery shelling, and land clearing operations in various border towns.
How come even after a ceasefire, one side continues that it only applies to Lebanon, that the Israelis can continue to fire?
In this episode, Matt provides his analysis of Israel's broader war aims in Lebanon and why civilians continue to bear the brunt of death and destruction. He draws parallels with what we're seeing in Palestine and across the Middle East, and most importantly, what needs to happen if we're to hope for any kind of peace.
Punitive measures against Israel, carrying out a process of justice.
Stay tuned for our conversation. And just a quick note on the recording. You'll hear some background noise of children laughing and screaming at the school next door to Matt's home. At one point, the recess bell goes off and plays a little piano tune. I found it to be a soothing reminder that even in wartime, life must go on. Here's a simple idea. Big rooftops should have solar. Across the UK, there are thousands of large buildings with empty roofs that could be generating clean electricity right now. Instead of waiting for government or big energy companies to get on with it, Big Solar decided to do it themselves. Big Solar Co-op is a not-for-profit cooperative owned by its members, installing solar on big rooftops across Britain. Join and invest from £100 at bigsolar.coop. Capital at risk, please read their online share offer document for details. You recently returned from a reporting trip to the south of the country, and people that will be following the developments know that Israel's war on Lebanon is just encroaching further and further into the country, particularly so in the last few weeks and months, but obviously we know that this has been going on for much longer than that. But before we kind of get into what you witnessed in the south and some of the people that you spoke to there, can you kind of explain what the frontline southern parts of the country look like and sort of how removed are they from where you are right now in Beirut?
I suppose there's two dimensions to the front line. So the very, very front line, which I wasn't able to get to, what we're seeing is Israel just blowing up entire villages to rubble, essentially. And they're complete ghost towns. And they're really just, I would say, erasing villages in the name of creating a security zone in the way that the Israelis would describe it. Beyond that, a little bit, which is where I was, we also see essentially major cities and towns being turned into effectively almost ghost towns or ghost cities. So there's hardly anybody there. The people that are there, they tend to be the elderly, the sick, the needy, people that the poor, people that don't have the luxury to, on a whim, just leave behind their homes or leave behind the little meager things that they have and flee up north towards Beirut or beyond. What we saw is that violence is just really indiscriminate there, both indiscriminate and discriminate. So unfortunately, we see that they're targeting vital civilian infrastructure and services. So this isolates people considerably. But then on the other end as well, because you give the quote unquote warning for people to flee, then the assumption by the Israelis is, well, anybody that's left in the city is a live target now. And we've seen this replay from Palestine and Gaza as well recently.
Hi, I'm Amy Hall, and I'm one of the co-editors at New Internationalist magazine. I wanted to take a minute to thank our amazing global network of journalists who cover the stories that the mainstream media ignores, from every continent. It's down to them that New Internationalist has been able to platform these alternative perspectives for more than 50 years and give a human face to the news. To get more of our reporting and analysis directly to your door or inbox, please consider subscribing to New Internationalist via the link in our show notes. subscribe.newint.org.
This isn't the first time that people in the south of Lebanon have been terrorized by Israel in this way. For many people, especially older people, this is something that they've lived with for much of their lives. Can you talk a bit about what this latest war and what this latest violence, what the impact is on people?
I mean, one major concern of mine is that they're essentially trying to almost sever off the south from south of the Litani River. So from about the city of Sur, Tyre in English, and all the towns and villages following after that towards the Israeli border from the rest of the country. So when we went, we crossed Kasmia Bridge, which was the last bridge that was connecting essentially the south to the rest of the country. And when we crossed that bridge, then it was bombed like 2 hours later. And as a result of that, there's 4 other major bridges in addition to that one. Throughout the course of the fighting, Israel bombed every single one. So what was very clear is that the Israelis are trying to isolate and cut off the south, similar, in my opinion, to what they've done historically with Gaza, where they've tried to seal Gaza in and effectively cut it off from the West Bank. We do see something very similar reflecting there within the south somewhat. Now, obviously, people in the south, they're not shielded in like in Gaza, where they can't get to Egypt, for instance, and the siege is also imposed on the Egyptian side. But it does make it just very, very difficult if there's no bridges out. And if you need to take a very long way, so you have to take a very long detour out through other regions in Lebanon in order to reach safer areas. But those other regions are all under attack as well. So then on the way, it just becomes significantly more dangerous. So the impact on civilians, people were saying that there are shortages already. There's shortages of food. There's shortages of medications. Not dire shortages. People do say there's people in the community that you try to mobilize and help them and knock on doors of the elderly and provide them with what they need. There's neighborly solidarity that's still present there. But there is this concern that if we continue to go on this road and we continue to normalize this isolation, then eventually things are going to be very, very difficult.
What do you see as Israel's justification for bombing this critical infrastructure? Is it a similar thing that they said in Gaza, is that they were legitimate Hamas targets, the hospitals, the schools, the mosques? Are they using that sort of same rhetoric in Lebanon?
Yeah, the exact same thing. When they started bombing the bridges, they were claiming that Hezbollah, uses these bridges in and out and things of the sort. Yeah, maybe. I mean, because they're the only bridges that anybody uses in and out. So, hundreds of thousands of people use it in and out. So, irrespective of how they try to dress it up as quote unquote terrorist infrastructure, which as they were doing in Gaza as well. For all the limitations and all the critical theory on international humanitarian law, and much of it is worth reflecting on and understanding. It's still, by this rubric, all of these justifications fall short. This is collective punishment. It is bombing, civilian infrastructure, and these are, very clearly outlawed under international law. And it's not just reduced to bridges. They've hit critical water sanitation plants. They've hit, water facilities. This is all part of the logic of just, making life increasingly difficult and unbearable for a lot of people.
The ceasefire, which began on April 17th, a supposed 10-day ceasefire, but we know that within hours, Israel was violating it. Again, we've been here before. We know that this is what Israel does. Can we talk about that? Like, is this just deja vu?
Yeah, I think it's more than deja vu. It's a military doctrine. I would say it harks back to the war on terror, and perhaps even predating that. I mean, the Israelis, for instance, in the West Bank, they used to try to hollow out essentially the legal definition of what amounts to of what it means to be a civilian and what is legitimate, armed target accordingly. Which means essentially that in between the intifadas and before even 2000 and after of 9/11, the whole war terror discourse kind of took place. Then the Israelis would find it that it was completely normal, and they helped normalize it, just to target any person that was off duty and walking around and in the West Bank or doing whatever that they were doing. And they would target them irrespective if they even had a semblance of a history of being an armed combatant or affiliation with an armed organization that was resisting Israel's occupation. And even if they were no threat in the immediate moment, then they would be killed. And I think just based off of this logic, there was always this idea that sovereignty, it's always a one-way street, that it can be completely eroded, that there can be targets accordingly in a country that can be extrajudicially killed. And then as a result of that, that's just needed in terms of the quote-unquote West security. So we've seen this with the U.S. and Yemen. We've seen it with the U.S. and Afghanistan and Iraq accordingly, and in Somalia, and in so many different contexts. And we've seen this with Israel as well, which helped normalize it. And so when we talk about a ceasefire today, okay, how come even after a ceasefire, one side continues that it only applies to Lebanon, that the Israelis can continue to fire? Well, this was phrased into the original truce that took place after the first major escalation between Hezbollah and Israel in 2024, and that ended with a truce in November. The U.S. essentially imprinted that Israel's right to self-defense is part of this truce, so giving them, freedom to fire whenever they want on Lebanon. But also this logic is something that applied to Israel in respects to Palestinians and applied to the U.S. in respect to, well, the global majority, to be honest, in terms of trying to erode sovereignty of other countries in the name effectively in the name of fighting terrorism accordingly. So it's that same logic, it's that same blueprint.
Israel's also established a yellow line in Lebanon, which we know it's done in Gaza and sort of applies very arbitrarily. Can you explain what it is, what the yellow line looks like in Lebanon and how it's similar, how it's different to the one in Gaza?
So essentially, Western media will try to put window dressing on horrific realities by claiming it's a security zone or buffer zone. And this is how the Israelis, and this is how a lot of Western media is portraying the yellow line, which effectively is a kill zone. So anybody that dares to enter this beyond this arbitrary line that the Israelis have essentially designated on the ground in Lebanon, which separates, I should say, hundreds of thousands of civilians from their villages and towns. Israel's occupying 55 villages right now. So, of course, seemingly anybody that wants to go back home becomes a live target. They can be killed now, right? Because this is part of the security buffer zone that the Israelis have designated, and that the Israelis justify as claiming that they're protecting against a quote-unquote Hezbollah invasion into northern Israel, or Hezbollah artillery fire into northern Israel by creating this 10-kilometer radius. And whether or not those military goals are legitimate or feasible or whatnot, I don't even want to get into. But the means in which they're trying to achieve it is through ethnic cleansing, essentially, and imposing this designated line. How it applies to Gaza, or how similar it is to the one in Gaza, I mean, I'd like to take a bit more of a historical lens, because I think it harks back as well to just, again, a military doctrine, military behavior that the Israelis have resorted to since the Nakba, which is the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from 48 Palestine, which is today Israel, that took place back then. Many of the people that were uprooted from their towns and villages in 48, they took refuge in Gaza. So Gaza's population is about 70% refugees today. And at the time, within the 1949 up until 1967, all of the Palestinian, or all of the towns in 1948, which is Israel today, that still had majority Palestinians in them were put under military law. And of course, there was a lot of towns that were emptied. And so what happened was there was many people in Gaza that were refugees in Gaza that wanted to cross this quote unquote invisible line that separated Gaza from 1948 or from their towns and villages and what Israel declared a state in, because they wanted to go and check on their villages and towns. And Israel had carte blanche orders to shoot and kill anybody that crossed that line from Gaza into Israel. It doesn't matter if they were combatant, it doesn't matter if they were civilian, anybody that crossed was a live target and you could kill them. We saw that logic replayed. The difference between Gaza and South Lebanon is, again, Gaza is completely cemented in accordingly. In South Lebanon, people are able to at least flee further north, and there are borders that are surrounding Lebanon accordingly. But still, the instrument of the yellow line serves the same purpose, not to distinguish between civilians and combatants, to prioritize Israel's so-called security interests over the human lives.
And you mentioned this at the beginning of our conversation, but I want to dig into a little bit more around what you sort of see as Israel's broader aims with this war and sealing off the south of the country. Can you talk a bit more about what you think lies behind that strategy and what the sort of long-term plan is for Israel's presence in South Lebanon?
Yeah, I think Israel has a few different scenarios in mind. I think there's scenarios that they are drumming up that's predicated on what kind of agreement they can get with the Lebanese government in negotiations that are ongoing right now. And I think from the Israeli perspective and point of view, I think they want to create different administrative zones in Lebanon somehow, which harks back to the Oslo Accords. And the Oslo Accords were essentially the blueprint for a peace process that was signed on the White House lawn between then PLO leader Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, which was the leader of Israel at the time. And effectively what the Oslo Accords did was that it carved up the West Bank in particular into 3 administrative zones. So you had a zone which was under the newly established Palestinian Authority's control. Then you had a zone in which it was civilian matters would be under the PA zone, but security matters under Israel. And then you had 60% of the West Bank, which is where we see settlements have essentially, spread like wildflower since that agreement. That was entirely under the control of Israel at that time. And since the Oslo Accords, we saw very early on, far before the election of Hamas, that took place in elections in 2005, steps by Israel to impose more strict bureaucratic impediments in order to cut off Gaza territorially from the West Bank. So we saw how under the guise of peace, Israel took bureaucratic measures and security measures in order to divide and conquer the West Bank and Gaza, and divide and conquer the West Bank within itself. I do see something potentially and accommodated for the Lebanese context in the cards for Israel. I do think that they want to put parts of South Lebanon, which are entirely ethnically cleansed now, and where they're blowing up villages, and where they will have Israeli outposts, a few Israeli outposts there, not as settlements, but as military outposts, to essentially just create almost a kill zone within one area of the South. I think that we could be seeing another area of the South where people are essentially living just under constant surveillance, and where some people might be able to return back to their homes. But again, they'll be living under the security control of the Israelis, even though bureaucratically they would be connected to the Lebanese government. I could see something of this sort. And then I could see another zone for the rest of Lebanon. We could say further up north, where it's essentially under the control of politically and militarily of the Lebanese government accordingly. And I think this is a scenario that the Israelis are trying to bring about in negotiations effectively. So to split it up under different regimes of Lebanese territory, and cement in that process the ethnic cleansing of 8 to 10 kilometers of land in the name of creating a sort of a new a new reality on the ground in respects to relations between Israel and Lebanon. Another scenario that I could potentially see, and this also harks back to Oslo, is that what essentially Oslo did was that it created a Palestinian Authority. And the Palestinian Authority, the logic behind Oslo was a logic, of course, underpinned by counterterrorism and not a logic of ending an occupation, right? So if you want to end any kind of armed resistance, then you have to end the occupation because that's what people are resisting against. Like, it seems to be very common sense. But instead, the counterterrorism logic was, okay, we have to demonstrate and prioritize Israel's security interests. And then once we can see that the PA can have a monopoly of force by rooting out everybody that wants to, quote unquote, challenge Israel or fight Israel, once they can crack down on all of these people, then as a result of that, then we can start talking about, okay, now that Israel's security interests are have been met by the Palestinian Authority, then Israel can start to, in theory, talk about how we, hand over power to the Palestinian Authority and start to gradually end, the occupation. So it was a bureaucratic, perspective and towards an ending occupation, and not a political perspective in terms of ending an occupation that was rooted under the logic of counter-terrorism. I think the U.S. and Israelis want to push the Lebanese state and push the Lebanese army to aggressively disarm Hezbollah. So again, having the Lebanese government prioritize Israel's security interests over the well-being and the interests of the Lebanese and the state of Lebanon here, essentially. And it should be said that the majority of people in Lebanon would like to see Hezbollah disarmed. In fact, it's a very polarizing topic here. But how and under what circumstances and how that takes place, the means is incredibly important here, even for people that are against, a group, holding such a strong monopoly of weapons outside of the state.
And what is the level of resistance to that pressure? And does the Lebanese government have any sort of leverage to resist that imposition of Israel and the US on dividing and conquering the country?
They don't have a lot of leverage. They're really between a rock and a hard place. And their calculation was very clear that they didn't want to be linked to the Iran track in terms of securing a ceasefire in Lebanon. And in a way, I can understand that, even if in the short term that would have brought about some type of respite. In the longer term, then suddenly, in the eyes of the Israelis and Americans, then the Lebanese government would be seen as essentially just completely dictated by the diplomacy and fate of the Iranians, so that they would also feel that they don't have a lot of agency there. So that they were calling for, listen, we want to have direct negotiations with the Israelis under U.S. mediation. And their thinking is, listen, maybe we can somehow convince the Americans, because at the end of the day, however much we talk about the lack of sovereignty or lack of control that the government may have over stakes internationally and domestically here in Lebanon, one could make a very similar argument with Israel, that as soon as Trump puts his foot down, then Netanyahu and Israel is actually forced to play ball a little bit and talk. So the Lebanese hope here is that they can somehow get through to the U.S. administration in order to put some type of pressure on Israel, and that this could create some kind of breathing space. But the reality is, one, I'm just not very optimistic of that. We've seen what the relationship is like between the U.S. and Israel accordingly, and Israel is on this path since 7 of October to, quote unquote, in its words, create a new Middle East. Really, I think it's just an extension and intensification of the Middle East that existed prior to 7 of October, in my personal opinion, which entrenches Israeli domination, and that the rubric for Palestine just becomes a rubric that is more intensively applied to countries within the region and not just Palestine as a result of that. But the fundamental issue here, or the fundamental vulnerability of the Lebanese government, is that because Israel is maintaining an occupation and blowing up villages, it's essentially negotiating with the Lebanese government by pointing a gun at its head. And it's saying, listen, you can either do 1, 2, 3, or we can escalate. Maybe we'll start, bombing further north again. Maybe we won't just confine it to the south. Maybe we'll hit Beirut once again. Maybe we'll just continue to escalate. And then under fire of escalation, you're going to have to agree to something that we think is going to safeguard our security interests and play ball if you really want negotiations. So it also carries major risks. But then if they don't do it, then Israel could also just say, well, there's no negotiations and we're just going to hit Hezbollah wherever they are, however Israel says it, and we'll just bomb the entire country again. So the government really doesn't have much leverage. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. And at the same time, on the other side, there's no indication that Iran is going to stop backing Hezbollah anytime soon as well, considering the vulnerabilities that they're having and the fact that they need to also military confront the U.S. and Israel. So what we see is Lebanon really caught in the middle of all of this.
And I think even more importantly than the government being caught between a rock and a hard place are ordinary people in Lebanon living through day after day of violence. Who do they have to turn to? Who do they have for support and hope?
I mean, themselves, unfortunately. Yeah, fortunately and unfortunately. I mean, there's a lot of discussion and framing about how Lebanon is a delicate polity, about how communities, there's sectarian rift between communities, and not all displaced people can find refuge in certain regions of the country. And I don't want to summarily dismiss this. Parts of this is true, and it's very complex about how it ties to the history of the country. But that's only half the coin, or not even half the coin. The other half of the story is that there continues to be incredible acts of solidarity among people. And I really mean that. When we were speaking to people in the South, I was speaking to two elderly women, one that was 68, another that was 62. One of them has a prosthetic leg. They're not able to leave their apartments. They don't have money enough to flee north. One needs medication for her blood pressure. Their balcony was bombed, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think. And so they're living amid rubble as well in their own home, but it's still home. I asked them, how do you guys get by? Well, they have each other, but they also say that strangers and neighbors and people in the neighborhood that are just aware that they're there, they come and drop things off to them. They drop off medication, they drop off food, they drop off things that they think that they can help them, because they know that these people are in need. When the bombings happened here in Beirut, people were rushing to the hospitals to try to give blood. We had people that were volunteers that tried to assist in clearing the rubble. That there was incredible displays of human solidarity among people.
It feels like what we're seeing in Lebanon and what we've seen in so many other countries across the region is this imposition by, whether it's Israel, whether it's the US, imposition of their idea of peace, of security. What does, in your view, need to happen for peace to truly be achieved in Lebanon as well as across the wider region?
Yeah, I think punitive measures against Israel. At this moment, the U.S. and Israel are clear-cut the main belligerents in this region. They've committed a genocide in Gaza. They're accelerating ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. They have destroyed, a number of military infrastructure, and they began an occupation in Syria for no reason. They've bombed Qatar. Now they've invaded Iran, and they've continued to renew an occupation on Lebanon. And they always claim this to be in their security interests. And the common denominator is that they're the ones starting all of these aggressions. And so as a result of that, the clear thread through this is just complete, absolute impunity since the British Mandate of Palestine, to be honest, and since the days of colonialism. And I don't think that there is any secret of what needs to be done, where the international community and Israel's allies, they need to change their tune on Israel, which is also a very difficult thing to ask because, well, they benefit from this as well. They're actively complicit because there are business ties involved in this, there are weapon ties involved in this. And so, it's hard to view, any kind of quote unquote peace outside of essentially reining in the Israelis and imposing, harsh penalties on them. And then at the same time, carrying out a process of justice, and this is also something that's just so important. what's very clear is that when the Israelis mean peace, their idea of peace is domination. And they're just doubling down on this, where peace for them is just the ultimate surrender of governments and the people they represent. But there's always going to be resistance to this. And so there's never going to be peace unless there's an end to Israeli impunity.
That was Mat Nashed. You can follow his work on social media via the links in our show notes, where you'll also find links to other things you heard about in today's episode. While you're there, please be sure to subscribe to New Internationalist magazine. It's the best way to support this kind of journalism. You can use the discount code TheWorldUnspun for 20% off your first year of a print and or digital subscription, which includes access to 6 print issues every year and full access to our digital archive dating back to 1973. This episode was hosted and produced by me, Maxine Betteridge-Mose. I'm the digital editor at New Internationalist. My co-editors are Amy Hall, Conrad Landon, Decca Muldowney, Nick Dowson, and Bethany Riley. Our theme music has been produced by Samuel Raphael Williams, and our logo design is by Mari Foos. Audio editing is by Nasik Hamza. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon.